Ever look back on something and think, huh, I remember that totally differently than how it actually felt?
Oh, definitely.
Or maybe you made a choice expecting one thing, but how you actually, experienced it
Right.
was kind of surprising.
That's exactly where we're heading today. We're doing a deep dive into this really fascinating idea of our two selves.
Okay.
The one living in the moment, the experiencing self, and the one looking back, the remembering self.
Right, and how these two different views shape our happiness, our memories,
hmm
our decisions, really.
Precisely. And how they interact.
Yeah, we've looked at a bunch of material exploring how we judge things, how we make choices, and we're going to unpack how these two selves work together and sometimes, well, clash.
Right. And that leads to some pretty unexpected ideas about what actually contributes to our well-being.
So the mission for this deep dive.
It's really to get a handle on how these two selves operate, why their views can be so different sometimes, and what that means for how you think about your own life, your own choices. The goal is to help you get a clearer picture, maybe, of what matters most for overall life satisfaction versus that moment-to-moment feeling.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get into it then. This core idea, experiencing self versus remembering self. What's the basic difference
Okay, think of it like this. The experiencing self is all about now.
right now?
Yeah. Is it pleasant? Does it hurt? It lives in the present moment. But the remembering self, it looks back.
It's the storyteller.
Exactly. It asks, how was it on the whole? It constructs the narrative after the event.
Okay, that makes sense. Like being on the roller coaster versus telling someone about the roller coaster later, you focus on different bits.
Perfect analogy. Now, the sources also talk about utility. Bit of jargon maybe, but important here.
Right, and there are two ways to think about it.
Yeah. Historically, utility meant basically pleasure and pain. What you actually feel. Bentham called it experience utility.
Experience utility.
Yeah.
Got it.
But then, especially in economics, it kind of shifted to mean decision utility.
Which is,
More about what you want, what
Yeah.
you choose, sort of its wantability.
okay. So the feeling versus the wanting. And the assumption in like rational models is that those two line up, right? We want what feels good.
That's the standard assumption, yeah.
Yeah.
That our decisions reflect what's actually best for our experience.
Yeah.
But that's where it gets interesting. They don't always match.
Which brings us to this injection puzzle. How does that illustrate the gap?
Right, this is a neat thought experiment. Imagine you have to get painful injections daily.
Okay, not pleasant.
Definitely not. Now, would you value reducing the number from 20 down to 18? The same as reducing them from 6 down to 4?
Intuitively.
No.
Getting rid of 2 out of 6 feels like a bigger deal than 2 out of 20, a third versus a tenth.
Exactly what most people say. That's the decision utility speaking. But here's the thing. From the perspective of the experiencing self, the actual pain avoided is identical, right? 2 injections worth in both cases.
Oh, yeah, okay. If each shot hurts the same, you're saving the same amount of pain.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So your experienced utility game is the same, but your decision utility, how much you value that reduction, is different. It suggests maybe experienced utility is sometimes a better benchmark for judging decisions.
That's a really different way to look at it. So how on earth do you measure this experienced utility, this moment-by-moment feeling? There was mention of a hedonimeter.
Yeah, that's an old idea from Edgeworth. Imagine this, like, hypothetical device.
Like a feeling tracker.
Kind of. Something that records your pleasure or pain level continuously. Then the total experienced utility would be the sum of all those readings over time. The area under the curve, if you like graphs. Time is key.
Okay, conceptually I get it, but practically, how do you do that? Is that where the colonoscopy study comes in?
Exactly. That was a way to try and capture this in a real-world, albeit unpleasant, setting. We had patients undergoing colonoscopies report their pain level every 60 seconds.
While it was happening.
While it was happening. This gave us a running commentary on their experienced pain, moment by moment.
And these procedures vary in length and intensity, right?
Oh, absolutely. Some are shorter, some longer. Pain levels go up and down.
Okay, so you have the real-time data. Then what?
Afterwards, we asked them for an overall rating. How much pain did you experience in total?
And you compared the real-time reports to that final memory. What popped out?
2 really striking things, which have held up in other studies too. First, the peak end rule.
Peak end.
Yeah. Their memory, their overall rating, was best predicted by averaging just 2 points in time. The moment of peak pain and the pain level right at the very end of the procedure.
Just those 2 moments, not the whole thing.
Largely, yes. And the second finding was Duration neglect,
Meaning?
meaning how long the procedure actually lasted, had almost zero effect on their overall pain rating.
Wait, seriously. So someone could have a procedure twice as long, but if the peak wasn't too bad and it ended okay, they might remember it as less painful than a shorter one with a bad ending.
That's exactly it. We saw cases like patient A and patient B. Same peak pain. But patient A's procedure ended when the pain was still pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
Patient B went on longer, but the pain eased off considerably towards the end.
And patient B remembered it better.
Remembered it as less painful overall, even though they endured discomfort for longer. Patient A just had the bad luck of that high pain ending, and it dominated their memory.
Wow. That creates a real dilemma, doesn't it? For doctors, I mean.
It absolutely
Do
does.
you try to minimize the actual pain the experiencing self feels, maybe by being quick, even if it's intense? Or do you try to minimize the bad memory for the remembering self, maybe by easing off gently at the end, even if that adds time?
That's the crux of it.
Mm,
And honestly, I think the intuition for patients, and maybe doctors too, often leans towards minimizing the bad memory.
yeah.
That's what sticks with us.
Yeah, the memory is what you live with afterward. You mentioned an analogy, a scratch symphony.
Ah, yes. Imagine listening to this gorgeous long symphony.
Yeah.
Totally engrossed. Then, right at the very, very end, screech. A horrible scratch ruins the last few seconds.
Uh,
You might walk away saying the whole thing was ruined. But was it? Your experiencing self had, say, 40 minutes of bliss.
right. Only the last bit was bad.
But the memory is soured by that ending. The remembering self gives the whole experience a bad grade because of the finale. It confuses the experience with the memory of it.
And the experiencing self doesn't really get a vote in that final evaluation.
Not really. The remembering self is the one keeping score, the one making the decisions about what to do next time based on those potentially flawed scores.
It really does sound like the tyranny of the remembering self, as you put it.
It can feel that way, and the cold hand experiment really drives this home.
Ah, yes, the not-so-pleasant hand in ice water. What did that show?
So people put their hand in very cold water and rated the pain continuously. Two conditions.
Okay.
Short trial, 60 seconds in 14 degrees Celsius water.
Ouch.
Long trial, 90 seconds total. First 60 seconds, identical. But then, for the last 30 seconds, we secretly warmed the water just slightly, maybe 1 degree. Enough for most people to feel the pain lessen just a bit.
Okay, so the long one has more total pain, but a slightly better ending for some.
Exactly. Then we asked them, essentially, if you had to do one again, which would you choose?
Gee, don't tell me they chose the longer one.
A significant majority, about 80% of those who felt the pain diminish in the long trial, chose to repeat the long one.
Wow. They chose 90 seconds of pain over 60.
They did. They willingly signed up for 30 extra seconds of discomfort.
Were they just enjoying the pain?
No, not at all. It wasn't masochism. It was a mistake driven by the remembering self.
Oh, so?
Because of the peak end rule and duration neglect. The memory of the longer trial, with its slightly improving end, was less awful than the memory of the shorter trial that just ended abruptly at a high pain level.
So the memory tricked them into choosing more actual pain.
Precisely. Their choice was based on the flawed memory, not the sum total of the experience. If you just asked them straight up 60 or 90 seconds, they'd pick 60 every time. But the memory system biased the choice.
This links to that less is more effect too, doesn't it? Where adding something somehow makes the whole seem worse.
Yes, it seems to be the same kind of cognitive quirk. Our intuitive System 1 thinking often deals in averages or prototypes, not sums.
Like judging a set of dishes and adding slightly damaged ones makes the whole set seem less valuable.
Exactly that kind of thing. So the remembering self doesn't sum up all the seconds of pain in the cold hand experiment. It forms a sort of prototype, heavily weighted by the peak and the end. Adding those last 30 seconds, even though painful, made the end better, improving the overall remembered prototype, even though the total pain increased.
It's so counterintuitive. Why would our memory work like that? Why ignore duration?
Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, maybe the intensity of a threat or reward is more critical for immediate survival than how long it lasts.
Okay. Well, maybe.
And we see duration neglect in animal studies too. Rats seem less sensitive to the duration of an electric shock compared to its intensity when forming fear responses. Same with pleasure intensity matters more for driving wanting behavior. So these memory features might have deep biological roots.
Okay, so if our decision-making guided by these memory quirks can lead us to choose things that result in more overall suffering, like in the cold hand experiment.
Or undervalue pain reduction, like in the injection puzzle.
Then our choices aren't always serving the interests of our experiencing self, are they?
That's the key takeaway. Our preferences, shaped by memory, don't always align with maximizing our actual experienced well-being. It really challenges the simple rational agent model, where preferences perfectly reflect interests. Our memories can be flawed, and those flawed memories drive our choices.
Speaking of how we remember things, let's talk about this idea of life as a story. How does thinking in narratives affect things?
It's a really powerful lens. We seem hardwired to think about lives, our own and others, as stories.
Like in the opera example, La Traviata.
Right. Think about it. The whole opera is long, depicts years of a life. But those last 10 minutes, the reunion and death, they feel immensely important.
Yeah, they define the ending.
Exactly. Stories emphasize significant events, turning points, memorable moments. They inherently neglect sheer duration. An hour of boredom doesn't make for a good story beat, right? The ending often carries disproportionate weight.
And we do this with real life too, not just operas.
Absolutely. Think about wanting estranged relatives to reconcile before someone dies. It's about the narrative arc needing closure, a good ending. We even care about posthumous stories. Was the scientist vindicated? Was the spouse faithful? We want the story to resolve well.
We want our own lives to be a good story.
Deep down, yes. It leads to some strong judgments when we evaluate whole lives, like in that experiment with the fictional Jen.
Ah, right. Tell us about Jen.
So researchers asked people to evaluate different versions of Jen's life. In one, she lived happily for 30 years. Another, happily for 60 years.
Okay, double the happy life. That should be much better, right?
You'd think. But people didn't rate the 60-year happy life as significantly more desirable or judge Jen as much happier overall compared to the 30-year version.
Duration neglect again. For a whole life.
Seems like it. People were evaluating based on the quality of a typical period, not summing up the happiness over time.
Wild. And what happened when they added extra years that were just, okay.
Even stranger, they added 5 slightly happy years to the end of both the 30 and 60-year lives. So 35 or 65 years total. Adding those extra less than blissful years actually made people rate Jen's life as less desirable and less happy overall.
Less is more. Adding mildly happy years made the whole life seem worse.
Exactly, because it dragged down the average or the quality of the ending, which heavily influences the remembered narrative or prototype of their life. Even when people compared the lives side by side, this effect held. It's a powerful bias.
But hang on, surely duration matters sometimes. Like a week-long vacation feels different from a month-long one, right? Or a long versus short childbirth.
Good point. Duration does seem to matter more when the quality of the end state changes significantly with length.
How so?
Well, after a month-long vacation, you might feel much more refreshed and rested at the end than after just a week. The end state is different. Similarly, a very long labor might leave someone far more exhausted at the end. Our judgment seems to track that progressive change and the feeling at the finish line.
Okay, that makes sense. It's still about the end state, in a way.
It often comes back to that.
So this dominance of the remembering self, prioritizing the story over the lived moments, leads to some interesting thought experiments.
Right,
Like the amnesic vacation.
right. Imagine planning a great vacation. But here's the catch. Afterwards, you'll have zero memory of it. Total amnesia. And no photos allowed.
Would you still go? Or pay as much?
My guess is, for most people, the value drops dramatically. Maybe you'd still enjoy the moments while they're happening.
The experiencing self would have a good time.
Potentially. But if the remembering self gets nothing out of it, no story, no memories to savor, it loses a lot of its appeal. It suggests a huge part of a vacation's value is the memories we expect to create.
There was a study about spring break diaries, too.
Yeah, Ed Diener found students' intentions to repeat a spring break trip were almost entirely predicted by their overall rating at the end of the trip, even if that rating didn't perfectly match their day-to-day diary entries during the break. The final memory ruled.
Okay, what about the flip side? The painful operation with guaranteed amnesia.
Imagine you need surgery. It's going to be painful, you'll be conscious, but you're absolutely guaranteed to have no memory of it afterward. Complete blank.
Okay.
How much do you care about the pain your experiencing self will go through? For many people, the answer is surprisingly little.
Really? Indifference.
Often, yes. Maybe a detached pity for that future self, but not the same level of dread or concern as if they were going to remember the pain. It's like the suffering of a stranger almost. It highlights this profound disconnect. The remembering self feels like me, while the experiencing self is just living through stuff.
This whole disconnect really throws a wrench into measuring well-being, doesn't it? The sources seem skeptical of just asking people, how satisfied are you with your life overall?
Exactly. Given how biased the remembering self is, peak end, duration neglect, focusing illusions will get to relying solely on that global judgment seems shaky. It's vulnerable to memory errors and temporary moods.
So the alternative is to focus more on the experiencing self's well-being. How do we even measure that? You mentioned time use.
Right. One approach is to measure the proportion of time people spend in states they want to be in versus states they want to avoid, basically maximizing good moments and minimizing bad ones.
Like achieving flow, that state of being totally absorbed.
Flow is a perfect example of a highly positive experience state. The goal would be to have more time spent in states like that, or simply pleasant engagement, and less time feeling stressed, bored, or hassled.
And the day reconstruction method, the DRM, was developed for this. How does it work?
It's a clever survey tool. We ask people to relive their previous day as a series of episodes, like scenes in a movie.
Okay. Like commute, meeting, lunch.
Exactly. For each episode, they say what they were doing, who they were with, and then rate various feelings, happy, stressed, tired, etc., on a scale.
And because you know how long each episode lasted.
You can calculate a duration-weighted measure of their affect. How much time did they spend feeling good versus bad? It gets closer to the area under the curve of their daily experience. And it correlates pretty well with more intensive methods like beeping people randomly throughout the day.
Interesting. And this led to the U index.
Yeah, the U index is simply the percentage of time a person spends in an unpleasant state. We defined unpleasant as any episode where negative feelings outweigh positive ones.
What did you find using that?
Well, for a sample of American women, the U index was around 19%, slightly higher than French or Danish women we studied. It gives a concrete, time-based measure of the negative side of daily experience.
And can it show, like, who suffers more or which activities are worst?
Absolutely. We saw that a small fraction of the population accounts for a large chunk of the total time spent suffering. Also, we could calculate U indexes for activities.
Like commuting.
Commuting had a high U index. Work, too. Interestingly, for American women, time spent with children had a slightly higher U index than housework.
Really? That's surprising.
It was, and it contrasted with French women who seemed to enjoy time with kids more, possibly due to better childcare support or different cultural norms.
So our moment-to-moment mood seems really tied to the situation we're in, maybe more than our overall job satisfaction or income.
That's a huge finding from this research. Your immediate situation, are you socializing? Is it noisy? Are you under time pressure? Is your boss nearby? These things have a powerful effect on your current feelings, often more than stable factors like pay or status, which influence life satisfaction more.
It comes down to attention, doesn't it? What are you focusing on right now?
Exactly. Your emotional state largely follows your attention. Unless you're, say, intensely grieving or madly in love, what you're paying attention to tends to dictate your mood. We even saw this with eating. French women seemed to savor their food more, pay more attention, and derived more pleasure than American women in the study.
So understanding this gives us handles to improve things, personally and maybe societally.
Definitely. Individually, you can try to consciously manage your time, less commuting if possible, more time socializing or engaging in active, absorbing leisure rather than just passive TV.
And for society.
Well, think about policies that reduce commutes, improve access to quality childcare, or create better opportunities for social connection, especially for older people. These could measurably reduce the national U index, improving collective experienced well-being.
And these kinds of measures are being used more now.
Yes, they're being incorporated into major surveys in the US, Canada, Europe, and the Gallup World Poll. It confirms the importance of things like health, social contact, and situational factors for how people actually feel day to day.
Okay, so we have experienced well-being measures like the U index and traditional life evaluation measures like the Cantrell ladder where you rate your life on a scale of 0 to 10. How do they compare? What predicts one versus the other?
They are related, for sure, but they definitely diverge in interesting ways.
Like with education.
Right.
Yeah.
Higher education strongly predicts higher life evaluation. People rate their life better on the ladder, but it doesn't necessarily improve experience well-being day to day and can sometimes even increase stress.
What about health?
Ill health hits experienced well-being much harder than it hits life evaluation. Makes sense, right? Chronic pain really affects your moments.
And kids, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, having kids tends to lower daily positive feelings based on DRM studies, but has a smaller negative or sometimes even positive impact on overall life evaluation.
Religion.
Religious participation seems to boost positive feelings and reduce stress day to day more strongly than it boosts overall life evaluation scores.
Fascinating differences. What about the big one, money and happiness?
Ah, yes. The data here paint a clear but nuanced picture.
Which is,
Being poor is miserable. Lack of money brings a lot of suffering, both in daily experience and life evaluation, no question.
okay, and getting richer.
Getting richer definitely boosts life evaluation. People with more money rate their lives as better, and that effect doesn't seem to top out. But for experienced well-being and day-to-day mood, there seems to be a satiation point.
See,
Yeah. In the U.S., around $75,000 annual household income seemed to be the point beyond which more money didn't buy more average daily happiness. Below that, more money definitely helped reduce stress and increase positive feelings.
so money helps you avoid suffering and makes you think your life is better, but doesn't necessarily make your moments happier beyond a certain point.
That's a good summary. And there's even a hint that very high income might slightly reduce the ability to savor small everyday pleasures, like just being primed to think about wealth made people enjoy a piece of chocolate less in one study.
Wow. So life satisfaction isn't just a flawed measure of experienced well-being.
Exactly. It's measuring something different, related, but distinct. It's about how you think about your life, not just how you live it moment to moment.
Which leads us neatly into thinking about life and this thing called the focusing illusion. What is that?
The focusing illusion is a cognitive bias where basically whatever you happen to be thinking about seems way more important than it actually is in the broader context of your life.
The thing you focus on fills the screen, so to speak.
Perfectly put. The mantra is, nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you are thinking about it.
Okay.
So when you're asked a global question, like how happy are you, or you're trying to predict how something will affect your happiness, you tend to focus on just a few salient, easy-to-recall aspects and ignore the vast complexity of daily life. It's related to what you see is all there is, WISIAD substitution, where you answer an easier question instead.
You mentioned a debate about California weather and happiness. How does the illusion play out there?
Right, I got into this debate years ago. The common assumption is, of course Californians are happier, they have better weather.
Seems logical.
But when we actually studied students in California and the Midwest, we found no significant difference in their reported life satisfaction. Californians like their climate more, sure, but it didn't translate into higher overall happiness.
But people thought Californians would be happier.
Yes. Both the Midwesterners and the Californians themselves predicted Californians would be happier, specifically because of the climate. They were focusing on climate when asked, and exaggerating its importance to overall well-being. For people living there, climate is just background most of the time, not something they actively think about constantly.
The focusing illusion in action. Does it apply to, say, possessions? Like how much pleasure you get from your car?
Oh, absolutely. Ask someone, how much pleasure do you get from your car? They'll give you an answer, probably thinking about how nice it is, maybe the fun drives.
Uh-huh.
But then ask, when do you actually experience that pleasure?
And the answer is?
Probably only when they're actively thinking about the car, which is rare. When you're commuting, you're thinking about traffic, work, the radio, not how great your car is. The pleasure experienced moment to moment is much less than the pleasure you think about when asked the global question. We overestimate its impact by focusing on it.
This illusion must distort how we view other people's situations, too, like the example of paraplegics.
Exactly. It's a powerful example. When able-bodied people think about paraplegia, they focus intensely on the disability itself and imagine a life dominated by negative thoughts about it.
So they assume constant unhappiness.
Right. But while the initial shock is devastating, people adapt. Their attention shifts. When they're working, socializing, reading dealer, they aren't constantly thinking about their condition.
So their actual experienced well-being might be much better than we assume.
Studies suggest yes. Paraplegics report reasonably good moods much of the time when engaged in everyday activities. But the focusing illusion leads outsiders, and even the individuals themselves, when evaluating their overall life, to overestimate the negative impact, because the condition is so salient when you think about it.
There was a study confirming this lack of understanding about adaptation.
Yes, Jonathan Cohn found that people who didn't know a paraplegic personally predicted much more time spent in a bad mood a year after the accident, compared to those who did know someone. Those with direct experience had a better grasp of the adaptation process. We see similar misjudgments about lottery winners' long-term happiness, too.
So someone with a chronic condition might have relatively normal experienced well-being day to day.
but still report lower life satisfaction because when they evaluate their life as a whole, they compare it to others or their past, and the condition looms large in that comparison.
Exactly.
Colostomy patients, for instance, showed normal daily happiness levels but lower life satisfaction and a willingness to trade years of life to be rid of the condition. The remembering self, when evaluating, is subject to a massive focusing illusion about the lived experience of the experiencing self.
And this focusing illusion leads to miswanting, making bad choices about what will make us happy.
Yes, that's Gilbert and Wilson's term. Because we focus on the wrong things or exaggerate the impact of certain changes, we make errors in predicting our future feelings, effective forecasting errors.
Like buying the flashy car versus joining a club.
Right. The car seems super exciting initially. We focus on that thrill. But the thrill fades as we adapt, and our attention moves elsewhere. Joining a social club might provide less initial excitement, but the ongoing social interaction demands our attention regularly and could contribute more to sustained well-being over time. The focusing illusion biases us towards the initially exciting thing whose impact we overestimate, rather than the thing that might keep us engaged longer.
It really does seem to boil down to time and how differently our two selves handle it.
It's a central theme. The experiencing self lives through time, moment by moment. Its well-being is the sum of those moments.
But the remembering self?
Tells stories. It focuses on significant moments, peaks, ends, transitions, and largely ignores duration. Prospect theory, with its focus on changes from a reference point, also neglects duration. The focusing illusion makes us fixate on certain aspects, ignoring the vast amount of time our attention is elsewhere. Our minds are brilliant storytellers, but surprisingly poor accountants when it comes to time.
This has been incredibly illuminating, a real deep dive into, well, ourselves and what happiness even means. It's clearly not simple.
Not at all. We've learned so much, particularly in recent decades, but the main takeaway might be just how complex and multifaceted well-being truly is. It's not one single thing.
Definitely. So, key points to recap. We've got the experiencing self living life, the remembering self telling this story.
Often using biased rules like peak end and duration neglect,
Then there's the focusing illusion, making us misjudge the importance of things.
leading to a divergence between experience well-being moment to moment and overall life satisfaction, our story about our life.
And for you listening, it's worth reflecting on this in your own life, right? How do your memories shape your choices? When you think about being happy, are you thinking about your moments or your story?
Yeah, or you maybe falling prey to the focusing illusion when you think about that next big purchase or life change. Which of your two selves usually gets the deciding vote?
It really gives you pause, which leads to maybe a final thought to chew on.
Okay.
If our remembering self is mostly in charge of our choices, but its memories are, well, kind of unreliable and biased,
Hmm.
how do we make choices that actually optimize both for feeling good day to day and having a life story we feel good about?
Hmm.
Should we consciously try to listen more to that quieter voice of the experiencing self?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely something to ponder.